Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution that we know we need. I'm not sure Canadians realize just how meddlesome we've been in the democracy of Haitians. Even the Canadian government's own website boasts that Canada has contributed to every single UN mission there for over the past 30 years. Not really something to brag about after you hear from our next guest about the political situation there right now and the fact that it's been crafted this way for a very familiar purpose. Then earlier this year, Mélanie Joly, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, announced another $123 million in funding for Haiti. $80 million of that is going directly to this multinational security support mission that we need to be paying more attention to. We also need to be looking closer at what lies beneath this security mission, namely the Global Fragility Act. This emergent neoliberal strategy that comes into play around Haiti was presented by Biden to Congress just last year. It's ugly, but not entirely surprising. They are blueprints for a new phase of Western imperialism. Travis is going to fill us in as it relates to Haiti. Welcome to Blueprints, Travis. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, yeah, no problem. My name is Travis Ross. I'm a teacher based in Montreal. I also co-edit the Canada-Haiti.ca website, which is the Canada-Haiti Information Project. It's a news gathering website with a homepage in French and a homepage in English, and I do the news gathering on the English side. And as of about 2 years ago, I started writing about Haiti for various outlets, including Black Agenda Reports, the Canada Files, and IT Liberté.
Why is Haiti such a focus for you?
It started, I suppose, as short as I can make it, I was volunteering a lot, working with people, children with disabilities, and then decided to go into education and become a teacher. And so to kind of find a bit of balance, but also kind of continue with the activism, I kind of looked at the scene in Montreal, and the two most active solidarity groups were around Palestine and around Haiti. And so I hooked up with, at the time, who was Haiti Action in Montreal. And that developed into helping to organize different events, bring speakers up from Haiti, eventually moving into helping to manage the website, which at the time was the Canada-Haiti Action Network website. And that kind of evolved into the site changing its name to what it had become, which was a news gathering website, and me dedicating more time to that. And that kind of dovetailed with what I would say was the Haiti solidarity movement in Canada generally becoming less and less active. So that there weren't really any active committees kind of in the 2010s, I would say, around there, although things have changed more recently. I managed the website for quite a while, along with my partner, Ralph, who lives in Manitoba. He himself is from the diaspora, the Haitian diaspora, with, for a time, Roger Annis, a longtime activist, helping us in the background. And then a couple of years ago, like I said, I started putting some time into trying to write about Haiti, in part because there's so few people trying to explain to a general audience like what was happening there, particularly in the English language. You can still find a lot in Creole and some in French, but in English you can count the number of investigative journalists covering Haiti on the left on one hand at this point. So there's a lot that needed to be shared, I felt.
Well, I'm glad you've got some practice, because I'm going to basically ask you to try to get the audience up to speed in terms of what's happening in Haiti right now and why there would even be a Haitian solidarity movement within Canada. Because I think, from a cursory look of mainstream media, if one were to just glean what you're going to get without digging, you have this impression of a devastated country by natural disaster, disease, and now it is ridden with gang violence. That is the narrative that one is absorbing. And maybe if you've been paying attention, you would know that Canada has invested or donated, or however they like to word it, lots, millions, tens of millions, over $90 million. Travis is probably going to correct my numbers here. And so we want to know here at Blueprints, what is Canada's role here? Yeah, what is happening? So we'll try to have it in discussion form so you don't have to give us a lecture, but can you really just start us off with perhaps the current situation right now in Haiti, politically speaking, and material as well? Like, what is it like for folks on the ground there?
So on the political front, there hasn't been an elected government in Haiti for many years now, since about 2017. That's when the last government was elected in Haiti, and that was in what's widely considered a sham election. So we're at least 6 to 7 years without any kind of form of election to bring in a government. There's currently a transitional presidential council that's been installed. It's made up of 7 different members representing different sectors of the political parties and elites. Arguably, 3 out of those 7 are beholden to the party that has been in power for the past 7 years, which is the PHTK. And of the remaining parties, they make up different sectors of the elites, with the exception of Famille Lavalas, who made the choice to take a seat on this transitional presidential council. They're traditionally the party of the left and the party of the poor majority, although it's arguable that they no longer have that position. So this transitional presidential council was brought in essentially by the United States and what's called the core group, which are it's an official group of Western countries and institutions that essentially just sign the dotted line for American policy in Haiti. They rarely deviate from it.
The core group, that's U.S., France, Canada, and Brazil?
And Brazil, the OAS, the UN, Spain. I'm going to miss a couple of them. But essentially, this is the international community. This is the West and institutions created by the West, with the exception of the UN, who support U.S. foreign policy in Haiti.
What's Kenya's role then?
As part of this moving to shift Haiti from a neo-colony down to just being an actual colony of the United States, there's been kind of 2 fronts. And one is to get this transitional presidential council in, which is quite unpopular in Haiti, although there are sectors who do support some sort of transitional government because they do want to bring security to the country, understandably. Along with it is the Multinational Security Support Mission, the MSS or MSSM, depending on which acronym the media is throwing out there.
That's the security force?
Yeah, essentially the United States was kind of working its way around the world trying to find a country to lead this force because they knew they couldn't do it on their own. It was just the optics of having Marines dropping into Haiti again for it would have been the 3rd or 4th time in the past century to occupy the country wasn't going to work, and the population is resistant to it. They first went to Canada, or the Canadian government, and the Brazilian government, trying to get them to lead this force, and the Trudeau government kind of politely deferred and tried to delay, and then eventually had to say no. And Brazil, having led the MINUSTA mission, which helped consolidate the coup government after the 2004 coup d'etat, also kind of basically refused to take the lead on in the mission. So then the United States, with the UN in tow, went to CARICOM and tried to find a Caribbean country who was willing to lead this force. In the end, none of the countries there were willing to lead it, although they were able to convince them to provide diplomatic support, and there are a few countries who are going to supply some personnel, but not nearly enough to actually make up an occupying force. So finally they found their country, or their leader, William Ruto in Haiti, who was willing to export their police force as part of this arguably illegal multinational security support mission into Haiti. He had originally promised upwards of 1,200 police officers, but at the moment only 200 have been deployed into Haiti. They've done some photo ops where they've had Kenyan police working through certain neighborhoods along with the PNH, but 200 Kenyan police officers not enough to achieve any of the assumed mission goals of the MSS. So we're still waiting to see how many more will be deployed. They're having Kenya itself is having its own there's a political upheaval, I guess would be the best way to describe it, in Kenya at the same time. They tried to pass austerity measures. The population is revolted. There are massive protests on the streets. William Ruto's government is not popular. The opposition parties have been trying to prevent this Kenyan force from being deployed and have been somewhat successful. It's arguable that even by Kenyan law, this deployment is illegal. And then they had promised their police officers, who are going to function as soldiers, but their police officers, something in the realm of like 100,000, I would say dollars, but whatever currency they use in Kenya. And just as they're about to deploy, let these police officers know that amount was actually dropping to 1,200 or 12,000, excuse me. So it had been cut by almost a tenth.
What makes it illegal? Because you're talking about Canada considering it and other folks partially contributing to it, because we haven't quite covered what their mission is there. So this is a security mission speared by the United States, couched in language.
It's a security mission, and that's another aspect of it, is that the mission hasn't actually been clearly defined. Yet the deployment has begun. But when it comes to legality, I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you like the interpretations that I've heard, which under Chapter 7, the UN can send some sort of mission that happened in 2004 of UN soldiers into a country as peacekeepers.
Not cops from other countries.
Yeah, that's not what's happening right now. This is a UN-sanctioned, Washington-funded, Kenyan-led force. And for that reason can be considered illegal. Okay, because it's not actually UN leading it. They just kind of sanctioned that it happened.
Okay, so why are all these major players so interested in half of that island there? Like, Haiti is, what is the island called? Hispaniola?
Yeah, Hispaniola, yeah.
That's a lot of attention for not a lot of... I'm guessing there's some resources there. Maybe you can explain it, because we're going on here on the assumption that Canada doesn't actually do heart of gold humanitarian aid. We've kind of debunked that many times. We know there's always another motive. Largely has to do with capital and imperialism.
Definitely, yeah.
So what is the deal with Haiti that they would spend all of this time and energy begging the world to send cops there to quell the violence?
Yeah, this is there's a ongoing discussion in terms of like what the actual reasons are. Understandably, anti-imperialists focus on natural resources, and Haiti does have a lot of untapped natural resources, so it's a factor. One that's often brought up is iridium, which I think it's one of the minerals that's necessary for building batteries and so on. So understandably, people would focus on that. It turns out Haiti's iridium is it's borders on non-existent. It's not actually enough to mine. It does have gold, has oil, but
sounds like a stretch, though. You sound so skeptical. What do you think?
It has these resources, but the argument that I'm most compelled by is more Haiti's geostrategic value. It is like very close to the United States. It is very close to Cuba. It shares an island with the Dominican Republic, who are themselves a neo-colony of the United States. And it's also the potential of a quote-unquote bad example, because the Haitian people are constantly trying to revolt and rebel against their colonial masters.
And they have quite a history there, right, of successful revolution.
Exactly, successful revolution. The first revolution against slavery, where the island was able to push out the French. I don't want to go that far back, because that does become a history lesson. I think the listeners are probably familiar with that, having this history. I think what's important to kind of balance that out is also understand that for the most of the past century, Haiti has functioned as like a neo-colony of the United States. There have been brief periods where it's managed to push the imperialists out, and that's when both times that Lavalas or family Lavalas was elected in the government. Most of the time that was Jean-Bertrand Aristide leading the party at the time. Those were brief periods where Haitians were actually allowed to elect a government that represented them and their interests. And both times they were cooed by the United States with the support of other Western powers like Canada. The first time Aristide was cooed, he was allowed to return, but after accepting austerity measures. And the second time he was dropped in the Central African Republic with the assumption that he would die or end up being assassinated. But a small group of dedicated activists actually went to the Central African Republic, spoke to him, And within weeks, he was flown out to Jamaica, where he stayed for a short period of time, and then lived in South Africa until he was able to return to Haiti. So Haiti and Haitians haven't been allowed to, have a functioning democracy or to live independent of imperial rule for most of the past century. That's the short of it. And Canada hasn't been an active partner in that until 2003, when it was decided that Jean-Bertrand Aristide, the democratically elected president, upwards of 90% of the popular vote.
Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. Numbers you don't see in the West, but that's just how popular he is, especially even more so than his party. The people trust him. 2003, when it was decided that he had to go, the first planning meeting to kind of figure out how the coup was going to go about, how it was going to be orchestrated, how the propaganda campaign was going to function, happened in Gatineau. Yeah, so just on the border of Quebec and Ontario.
That's Trudeau's backyard.
Yeah, exactly. And since then, Canada has had an active role in imperialist policy towards Haiti. I'd say that's kind of waned over the past couple of years as they've taken a step back and refused to participate in this multinational security support mission. From my understanding of where the Canadian government is now, they have more of a focus on Ukraine and Russia, although Melanie just stepped out and had an interview with the leader of the Venezuelan opposition just in the past few days. So it may be that Canada's going to step into Latin America again. But for the most part, after that failure to nominate Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela, ever since that's fallen apart, my read on it is that Canada's taken steps back away from the Caribbean and Latin America politically.
Maybe they just want us to think that they have.
In terms of taking an active diplomatic role, Canada continues to fund NGOs and so-called human rights groups in Haiti, and continues to support American policy there. But on the diplomatic front, seems to have taken a step back in terms of being actively involved on like the Haiti file as it were. Yeah,
we're always able to couch our activities in humanitarianism or instilling democracy, right? That's the whole neoliberal spiel. All you need is a functioning democracy and everything will be good. But, and if anybody's listening and they're shocked by the fact that Canada has participated in coups, you need to have been listening to us. But we'll link some of the episodes back where we've given other kind of receipts to Canada's imperialist roles, particularly in Latin America. But I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the ability for us to continue to couch this as a humanitarian project when it seems obvious once you start discussing it and digging into it that it's anything but. And it's just been like repeated attempt after repeated attempt, just repackaged. But how long can the Canadian public be swallowing this for? Like they're having assistance in the media because, as you read, and as I kind of was trying to get a refresher on Haiti, I tried to use sources outside of you to contrast. And yeah, that's basically all you're getting is just there's like gang violence, lawlessness, which is completely blamed on the fact that there's no functioning government, but that is just kind of a run of bad luck.
The Canadian media tends to kind of just vacillate between like Haiti is worthy of our money and our charity, or they're not worthy. And those are the two tracks that the Canadian media, mainstream media, understands. So yeah, both are racist, but at times you'll see kind of a vitriolic racism coming out of even the CBC, where it's like these people can't take care of themselves. They waste all the money they give them. They're not worth our time to look at these poor Haitians. They're suffering because of this or that, and therefore we should give them some of our money. Yeah, but as far as where our money is going now, Canada is the second largest donor to Haiti, so behind the United States. They give you an idea of the degree to which Canada actually is involved in Haiti, and a lot of that money actually goes to the national police. So when Aristide came in, he disbanded the army because it had a role in several coups. So Haiti has one national police force, comparable, I suppose, to the RCMP, and that's where a lot of our money goes. aside from that, we do back NGOs and human rights groups. Some of my own research has shown that Canada kind of learned their lesson about giving money directly to these groups in and around the coup. So I'll try to unwrap this for your listeners. Essentially, right now, there's two fronts where Canada is giving money, and that's to human rights groups, and to human rights groups have a focus on women's rights, maternal health, and so on, as part of Trudeau's feminist foreign policy. A little bit of digging, and you find that a lot of the funding isn't going directly to these groups. It's actually going through Canadian NGOs who then hand the money over to these groups.
After some administration costs.
After some administration, yeah. One of these Canadian NGOs is Avocats Sans Frontières, or Lawyers Without Borders. They take millions of dollars from the Canadian government and then hand them over to these groups. And I'm going to forget their policy, but they have a particular policy where they don't kind of engage in the politics. So they just give them the money and that's it. They're not taking any responsibility for what that money is used for. So in terms of these feminist human rights groups, the focus is often on maternal health, on reproductive health, and so on, like causes that anyone could get behind.
Sure.
But the problem with these groups is that their politics are often in line with Canadian American foreign policy. And I can give you one key example for your listener to kind of help understand, which is a group called Qui Femme. That's in Creole. So basically a group organized around family and women's rights. It's led by Danielle Magloire. And Danielle Magloire is also the vice chair of FOCAL, which is another human rights group, or Front for Human Rights, which is funded by the Open Societies Foundation. Her role in sort of the NGO system goes all the way back to the coup, as does Canada's funding for another human rights group called the RNDDH, which is itself an infamous group. Canada continues to give them money through Avocats Sans Frontières, not in any kind of direct signing checks directly to them. And the RNDDH also had a direct role in the coup d'etat in 2004. So keeping in mind these people are still receiving funds to this day, I'll just move the conversation back to 2004. The United States, Canada, and France are actively involved in trying to foment a coup against Aristide, the democratically elected leader. And they're doing so in part through a propaganda campaign. And part of this is to fund groups inside Haiti who are against the democratically elected government and are going to parrot talking points that are being fed to them by whether it's the National Endowment for Democracy or the State Department or at the time CIDA in Canada. The RNDDH, led by Pierre Esperance, played a key role in this. It was a so-called human rights group, but essentially what it did was manufacture, whether it's massacres or other events, and then would blame them on the elected government, and then that would be turned into propaganda to show that this democratically elected leader is actually a tyrant who himself needs to be taken out in a coup. He himself is part of the bourgeoisie there, and other factions in the bourgeoisie in Haiti were also supporting this because Aristide was an authentic social democratic leader who was trying to raise up the poor, raise the minimum wage from $2 a day to $5 a day, and had started asking for reparations from France. So things that you just cannot do because they threaten business interests, whether it's Canadian, French, or American business interests in Haiti. So this character, Pierre Esperance, on working as the director of the RNDDH, manufactures all these events, accuses leaders and members of Lavalas having, whether it's committed murders, led massacres, or ordered whatever it is. And this helped build up the hysteria in the Western media that this guy has to go. The coup happens. Aristide ends up with Black Ops Marines at his door and they tell him if you don't leave, we're going to kill your whole family and all your friends, and lift him and drop him into the middle of the Central African Republic. And within a short time, the Marines and some Canadian forces land to kind of secure Port-au-Prince, the capital. And in short time, UN force, MINUSTA, in this case technically legal under Chapter 7, is brought in to occupy the country. You could call it an interim government. I would call it a coup government, was brought in to administrate the country. In this process, started with a tripartite council, which meaning just three people who were chosen by the Americans, the Canadians, the UN, and the core group, all these countries that are considered the international community, who all the imperialist countries. Yeah, those three individuals then chose what was called a Council of Sages. So 7.
Did they call it that?
Yeah, they did. Sometimes called the Council of the Wise, and essentially 7 members of the elite from different sectors of the bourgeoisie, and those 7 then selected the government that was going to run Haiti.
Oh, okay.
Of those 7 people who were selected, all of them, of course, being supporting the coup and the United States and Canada's policies in Haiti, one of them was Danielle Magloire, who heads this so-called feminist NGO, KFAM, who is now continues to receive funds from the Canadian government, or her organization does, and is also vice chair again of FOCAL, and FOCAL is fully funded by Open Societies Foundation, George Soros, etc. So these are the way that Canada, while not being at the forefront diplomatically, continues to interfere in Haiti's sovereignty.
It's got a lot of parallels to some of the tactics used against Cuba, in the way that they weaponize the Catholic Church, right? A seemingly humanitarian organization to the international community, right? Easy to support and completely subversive inside the nation, and creating hysteria and trying to, delegitimize the revolutionary government.
Yeah, in the case of Haiti, the role of the Catholic Church was complicated because, like a detail I left out, that Jean-Bertrand Aristide was a Catholic priest, a Salesian priest. So he came out of the Liberation Theology School along with like Oscar Romero and so on. So he was a legitimate Catholic priest, but speaking against all these interests, which definitely made the role of the Catholic Church complicated in and around the coup.
And what a tactic to be able to allow then these core nations to appear to their own electorate as heroes, right? Because on paper, you're funding humanitarian organizations. Who has the time to, we'll circulate this wide and far, but who has the time to understand all those connections and what it means for actual democracy for Haitians?
Yeah, this kind of speaks to then the question about the media and who Canadian media chooses to speak to and who speaks on behalf of Haitians. When you have someone like, for example, Danielle Magloire kind of speaking on behalf of Haitian women, it's easy to see with this background that she really has no connection to the like an average Haitian and their daily lives. She's somebody whose career has been built on the Canadian NGO system, and it receives constant funding from private foundations and from governments, and has never lived as a member of the bourgeoisie in Haiti, has never lived the life of the average Haitian woman, whether it's in the countryside or in the slums of Port-au-Prince. And Pierre Esperance, I mean, he's a particularly vile character himself, because Daniel Magloire, as someone who sat on this like Council of Sages and so on, certainly had a role in the coup and all the consequences of the coup, which includes the murder of like thousands upon thousands of political activists who were fighting for democracy and Haitian sovereignty. She does carry some of the responsibility, whereas Pierre Esperance had a very direct role in actually pointing to specific individual leaders, making false accusations in order to have them arrested by the police and then to be either disappeared, murdered, or thrown into jail for who knows how long without any charges. The RNDDH had an actual formal relationship with the coup government, where anyone they pointed to, not with any evidence, just a press release or just like this person has done this, was enough for then the coup government to send police forces after these individuals and have them thrown in jail or possibly disappeared. One key detail, I guess, for understanding how Haiti got to where it is today is just that the past 2 elections have brought this PHTK government to power. The PHTK is better understood as like a kind of a cabal of gangsters rather than really a political party in a true sense. After the coup, efforts were made to keep Lavalas or Famille Lavalas out of elections. So whether it was using technical rules of saying that you didn't meet a deadline or just formally banning the party from an election, the party of the majority was kept out. And that caused that party to start to fracture, in part because of internal issues, but also so that there could be some representation for the people. But by the election around 2011, 2012, that brought Michel Martelly to power, the head of the PHTK at the time, and one of these gangsters I'm talking about. His role, along with the role of the party who stayed in power right up until when his predecessor, Jovenel Moïse, was assassinated, was to dismantle the state and make it so it couldn't function. So they were actively trying to suppress human rights groups and so on. They were actively allowing for seats on the various elected positions not to be fulfilled and so on, so that when Jovenel Moïse, roughly 10 years later, was assassinated, only a third of the Supreme Court was left. All the other seats were vacant. And then the head of the Supreme Court died of COVID. There were many elected positions in government that were not filled, and so on, so that by the time we get to today, this explains why there's no functioning government. So along with the government institutions being hollowed out, society starts to collapse to a degree, and security starts to collapse. And what would happen in any given place, not just Haiti, is that people start to organize locally and collectively to defend themselves against these criminal groups who themselves are being armed and funded by either elites or oligarchs. So
why are we calling them gangsters? Just so I can understand. Okay, so like my idea of a gangster is usually going to be dealing in narcotics or other illegal trades, right? And establishing a territory via violence and intimidation and it being territorial. Is that exactly what they are? Because like our gangs, from a Canadian perspective, they don't have political parties. So for me, it's like, is that a derogatory term that we're using to describe them? Or are they legit gangsters that also, like, is this just typical of Haitian politics that they do play a role in politics?
Yeah, there are more informed people who can give you a better sort of history on that, but the shortest version I can give in a nutshell is that it wouldn't be appropriate now to call them gangs.
It would or would not? Sorry, I didn't.
It would not be appropriate to call them gangs now, no.
Okay.
But going back to the early 2010s, it would be appropriate to call some of these armed groups just simply gangs, yeah.
So they've developed into more of a political entity,
yeah,
in the absence of government.
Yes. I mean, I'm hesitating only because I have my own opinions on this, but I want to make sure your listeners understand there's a broad spectrum of opinion on this because, so again, like Haiti is part of the narcotics trade, like global narcotics trade. The ports are used to get drugs and money and arms from one place to another. So yes, when I say like Michel Martelly himself, who is often like framed as like this silly musician who does like ridiculous things on stage, this is kind of a front. In the background, he's a gangster, and he's somebody who is deeply involved in the drug trade, and as are many of the elites in Haiti. If we go back to that period of time, there are armed groups, gangs, often in poor neighborhoods, and they're hired by politicians or by elites to go do a particular job, whether it's to go take out a competitor's business or to go assassinate somebody who they want assassinated, that sort of thing. They're doing jobs. They're not kind of working as a paramilitary force for a faction of the government. They're desperately poor people who have guns and who have no other choices, so they get into this sort of lifestyle. But as the PHTK successfully dismantled the state, and along with that, the PNH, the police force, and your average Haitian is finding that they no longer have any protection against these gangs, and simultaneously, as the state's collapsing, elites, oligarchs, politicians are starting to use these gangs more and more often, and starting to arm them with larger, more sophisticated guns in order to achieve whatever ends they may have. So these gangs are growing bigger, they're more well armed, and your average Haitians are finding themselves in a situation where they can't rely on the state to protect them. If you're in the regions outside the capital of Port-au-Prince, that often means like forming vigilance brigades, which are essentially just communities rising up, arming themselves, and either defending their borders or pushing these gangs out. But in the context of Port-au-Prince, where these gangs turned armed groups are concentrated, some communities found themselves with no choice. Either you arm yourself and protect yourself, from these gangs, or you will be consumed by them and they will take over your neighborhoods.
Politically, do people make the distinction? Because I wonder about communities that I would call them like resistance groups to a degree, just based on your description, right? Like resisting that violence in their community. And
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure this happens naturally, like in these situations. Once they're formed and armed and territorial, are the distinctions made between them and gangs that, do it for the purpose of profit as opposed to protection?
Well, this is where it becomes controversial, or at least there's a lot of debate over this. You'll find Haitians in the diaspora or even living in Haiti who would say these are all gangs, these are all violent armed groups, they all need to go, there's no distinguishing between any of them, they're all bad. Full spectrum all the way to the other end who would say, like the people at IT Liberté, as well as others, it's not just that one institution, who would say that this new coalition of armed groups called Vivre Ensemble is itself revolutionary and moving in a direction of becoming solely revolutionary and not criminal in order to liberate Haiti from imperialist rule, and every opinion in between.
Viva Ensemble, are they asking for sovereignty? Is that part of their...
Yeah, just to help your listeners get to Viva Ensemble, I'll try to break it down, and then I'll just I'll try to make it clear what my bias is. My bias is on this. So, as the state institutions are collapsing, certain neighborhoods and areas are realizing you're either ruled by gangs or you defend yourself from them, and from there we get what are usually called vigilance brigades. They have other terms. You can call them like local popular resistance, whatever. From this is where you get this character, Jimmy Cherizier, who himself is quite controversial. It can be described as anywhere from notorious gang leader responsible for massacres to revolutionary, not guilty of any of these crimes that you're accusing him of. He was one of these local leaders who, because he has police training, successfully gathered a few other police officers and pushed a gang out of his neighborhood in the 2017-2018. He was kicked out of the police force, blamed for a crime he didn't commit. I don't think that one issue is actually controversial. Ends up in his neighborhood, pushes the gang out, and then kind of locks down his borders. And at the same time, this is happening in other neighborhoods where other gangs are rising up because they're being more and more well armed by their benefactors and the Haitian elite and the oligarchs, and they're trying to take over more and more territory. And more of these vigilance brigades are popping up successfully defending the borders of their neighborhoods. This evolves from 2018 to 2021, where Cherizier formally announces the G9, which was a coalition of vigilance brigades and criminal gangs who he would argue, convinced to stop engaging in criminal activity, at least against the people in our neighborhood, and to join this coalition against the oligarchs and the ruling elite. That's what he would say. All along the way, he has his detractors, again, in the diaspora and in Haiti itself, who didn't believe this was authentic. Within 2 days, of the G9, this coalition of armed groups being announced, within 2 days of that, JPEP is formed, and JPEP is a coalition of all the criminal armed groups, where we have evidence that they were actually being bankrolled by oligarchs. There was a specific oligarch named Reginald Boulos who admitted to funding, on the radio, JPEP, this coalition of criminal armed groups. And in this coalition of criminal armed groups, you have some of the other names your audience might recognize, like Izo and the 5 Second Gang. They're arguably the most brutal criminal armed group in Haiti. They're now involved in the drug trade. He had a successful YouTube channel. He actually won YouTube awards for hitting certain thresholds of followers. Would talk about his crimes on YouTube, but it was largely to build his career as a rap artist. And the other main criminal group was Kalsan Maozo, or 400 Idiots. And they themselves were heavily involved in the various kidnapping rings in Haiti.
I have a question. I'm just full of questions because I'm just learning. I'm just taking notes like crazy. Oligarchs, again, from a Canadian perspective, when you talk about oligarchs there, and they are closely tied with capital, which is they are capital, and usually the government facilitates their behavior to a degree, and vice versa. Now, are these oligarchs not in any way bankrolled or supported, encouraged by the United States? Or are they, whenever I see oligarchs acting bad, I have to imagine who they might be helping out, right? Or who might be helping them out. And so is the U.S. funding the gangs and also trying to fund the police to fight the gangs?
Yeah, so kind of disentangle this. I mean, the best author to go to specifically to kind of break down the oligarchs is Jean Saint-Ville. His stuff can be found on my website, but they Google his name, they'll find his material. The most wealthy oligarch is Biggio, and Biggio himself isn't just the richest man in Haiti; he's actually the richest man in the Caribbean. Lives in Florida, but owns the biggest ports in Haiti, and owns lots of businesses in and around the Caribbean.
All our favorite exiles end up in Florida.
Yeah, exactly. It's really where I think some of the attention should be brought in terms of like popular protests. If people are looking how to support Haitians in terms of mobilizing, going outside the homes of these oligarchs in Florida would definitely be a new tactic that they're not prepared for. Two of the other oligarchs who I would like draw your audience attention to, one is Andy Apaid, or the Apaid family. And they have a direct connection to Canada in the sense that they own a lot of the sweatshops, the textile factories that employ Haitians at like poverty wages. That doesn't quite describe how little they make.
Do they have a home here?
Yeah, exactly. They contract to Gildan, which is a company based in Canada. But it's essentially what they want Haiti for, which is to be the equivalent to Bangladesh is to China, like a very poor, very cheap workforce who can do cheap assembly.
Closer to home.
And remind me, because we got to get to the Global Fragility Act, but I don't want to get distracted yet, because that is kind of the end goal of all of this.
That's my goal, is to distract you, though.
There's so much to talk about, but when it comes to these oligarchs, these are extremely wealthy people who don't blink to get involved in politics in Haiti, and that's what I guess people should understand. Because in the Canadian front, I think people understand that very wealthy people do get involved in politics, but they often don't actually run for office or overtly engage. They usually take a step back and allow like interlocutors to do this.
We're talking about you, Galen Weston.
Yeah, exactly. But someone like Reginald Boulos, for example, who I said was like, he was willing to tell a radio host on the radio that he was funding criminal gangs himself.
An alliance of criminal gangs.
Yeah, an alliance of criminal gangs, thank you, had just left the leadership of a political party that he formed called NTVIET. So he actually led a political party.
That's messed up. I feel like Trump is almost at that level, though, of just pure honesty, like, this is how big of a piece of shit I am. I own it, and you're going to love me for it.
Yeah, and they can count on the media and not really do anything with this, right? Like, it was a footnote that was ignored by most of the media. It was only picked up on the left. He also was like deeply engaged along with all the other oligarchs in the 2004 coup. I could dig through the history with you if you want some examples, but safe to say they, to one degree or another, had a role in either financing gangs who were then attacking the Famille Lavallaz government, and then the Famille Lavallaz government would respond to this violence, go, look, they're violent, they're shooting at people, or helping to fund propaganda campaigns, forming quote-unquote civil society groups to manufacture propaganda about so-called crimes committed by the government, etc. So these oligarchs do have an active role, although at this point it seems like most, if not all, have actually departed Haiti because they are understandably afraid that they may be a target, that the Vivre Ensemble coalition, that one member of the coalition or the coalition itself may walk into their neighborhood next and start occupying their homes and taking them out.
It just seems like hard to understand. Not hard to understand because it's the United States, but how they try to explain both essentially condoning the gangs, propping them up, hosting their founder, but at the same time saying they need tens of millions of dollars to fund a police force to combat these same gangs.
Whatever side of the debate you're on Cherizier's role in all of this, I think all sides would agree who are watching is that this was the intent.
Yeah. Get
the PHP party in power through two sham elections, allow them to hollow out the states, then start funding criminal gangs who then make life unlivable for average Haitian, in order to justify an invasion of some sort, an occupation of some sort that is fundamentally Washington-led. So there won't be one American right now who's part of this force. It's UN sanctioned. It's mostly Kenyan personnel and some Caribbean, other Caribbean countries, but it's fundamentally an occupation force that is financed and led by Washington. They want to then go in, occupy the capital, to install this transitional government in order to then have an election, which most observers on the left would say will be another selection, meaning things will be orchestrated in a way to make sure that candidates who are favorable to American foreign policy, to imperialism, get power. And then they'll start negotiating with the United States what is called the Global Fragility Act, which will then lead to at least a 10-year, if not longer, occupation of Haiti by American forces.
Jesus.
So the Global Fragility Act is a law that was passed in 2019 with full bipartisan support. So that's all the way from Trump to Ilhan Omar. We're super enthusiastic for this Global Fragility Act. It passed without much fanfare, and it just kind of sat there. They didn't start working on how to implement until a little while later. And Haiti was chosen as the test case for the Global Fragility Act. Although it's not the only country on the list where they want to implement this. There's a variety of about 7 different.
Oh, this is a template.
Yeah, Haiti is often the place where the United States like to experiment with their policies and see how they're going to work before they're going to be applied to other countries. Responsibility to protect around in the early 2000s is a past example. Now it's the Global Fragility Act. The Canadian government has supported the Global Fragility Act quietly. There was one diplomat in the Canadian embassy who said, "We're happy it passed. We support it," and then it kind of stopped there, and the Canadian government doesn't talk about it. But essentially, what the Global Fragility Act allows for is for a foreign government to negotiate 10-year security assistance deals with the United States, where essentially the United States will be able to go in, and by the United States, I mean the State Department, USAID, and the Department of Defense, go in and help rebuild the government and rebuild society, while simultaneously having been justified in doing so because the government invited them in and negotiated how the Global Fragility Act is going to be implemented. So this is the ultimate goal of this whole process: make Haiti, and especially Port-au-Prince's capital, ungovernable in a sense, and so insecure that it causes a migration crisis, which then pushes Haiti up the list in terms of priorities, and you're able to whip up a frenzy to build up this multinational security support mission, which then will go in, fight the gangs. I'm using the term too again. Fight these armed groups, create a certain degree of stability in the capital, which will allow for elections to bring in a party that's compliant with U.S. imperialism, who will then negotiate this Global Fragility Act. That seems to be the plan going ahead over the next 5 years.
What a fucking mess! Because you can't open up these sweatshops without some level of stability, and they've just created such an untenable situation there that I can only imagine even right now you could think of many uses for the Global Fragility Act, or places where they would happily or be able to have installed a government that would make that request, right? Because assuming they say the call has to come from inside the house, right? Someone has to request their assistance. But that's meaningless when they've spent 20 years installing their preferred government or interim government or whoever is the face of power at the moment.
It creates the necessary optics to kind of legitimize it.
Swooping in to save them, right?
Yeah. Al-Ghanouchi, who was running the country for 2 years prior to this transitional presidential council being brought in, was understood to be illegitimate by everybody. But he was the favored candidate to run the country for the U.S. and the core group, and that's what he did. He oversaw the continued degradation of the state in Haiti and the continued arming and funding of these armed groups, criminal armed groups. Honestly, Henry may still be in power if it weren't for this Vivre Ensemble coalition, because he went to Kenya. He went on a little bit of a trip in order to build up support for Haiti, but also to formally sign this deal to allow for the Kenyan force to come in, which he had no right to do according to the Haitian constitution because he wasn't elected. but he was going to do it anyways, and the Vivre Ensemble coalition chose that moment to rise up and attack the airport.
He didn't make it back.
Well, they attacked the airport, and that successfully shut down the airport, and so Anki wasn't able to return. And then he tried to land in the Dominican Republic. They refused, so he was literally like flying over the island of Hispaniola, unable to land anywhere. No one would take him. Ended up in Puerto Rico, and to my knowledge, no one has seen him since. There's been articles saying he is in this place, he is in that place, but it's up for debate where he is and whether he is truly free somewhere, like easing his way into retirement in Florida, or possibly under the watchful eye of the DEA or the FBI. Yeah, it's a complicated situation. But as it goes now, I promise your audience I would try to like break down what's happening a little more with so-called gangs, armed groups in this coalition. And this kind of connects to how the media covers things. So I have my own opinion, but what I gather now, because of the conditions in Haiti, these armed groups are largely localized to Port-au-Prince, and the regions outside Haiti's capital are often actually quite peaceful. They're being disrupted by this activity because it's the capital. Often these gangs interfere with transportation of goods across roads that go near Port-au-Prince, but there are huge parts of Haiti that do not look anything like the way the media portrays them. This is very much localized to Port-au-Prince. And whether you describe this Vivre Ensemble group as revolutionary or wholly criminal or something in between really depends who you're talking to. Like any other group of people, there is a wide variety of opinions on the nature of these armed groups. But this, I don't want to say a consensus, but at least I feel like at this point I could say that a large plurality agree with the assessment that the words you often hear are the RNDDH created Cherizier, meaning this Canadian and American funded fake human rights group who lobbed one false accusation after another at Cherizier when he was just a local ex-cop defending his neighborhood from armed groups, accusing him of massacres and so on, replicating the same model they used when they're accusing the Famille Lavallas government of certain crimes. That at that point, 2018, 2019, 2020, that he had gained a certain degree of legitimacy. If you understood that the crimes he was being accused of were false accusations, that he had gained a certain amount of legitimacy, and that if you were living within the borders of his territory, you were safe, the territory was clean, and you were protected. And if you were then part of his G9 coalition, the same could be said for living in any of these other neighborhoods that are part of the coalition. And they were themselves constantly under attack by this coalition of criminal armed groups, JPEP. And all an oligarch or elite needed to do was hand over some money to one of these armed groups. They'd go attack one of the members of the G9. There would be a fight. And then you'd go and say, look, there's the G9 engaging in violent action, killing people and so on and so forth, giving no context for the fact that the people instigating the battle, the fight, whatever it was, were themselves oligarch or elite funded criminal armed group. So Cherizier had himself in a bind where he didn't have the firepower or the numbers to take out his main competition, which was this JPEP criminal armed group coalition, and was constantly reaching out and trying to convince them to stop with their criminal activity, start protecting the people within their neighborhood and supporting them rather than exploiting them.
Understandably.
And essentially grow the G9 and take on the people who were really harming them, which were the political elites and the oligarchs. And he had some success in that, in getting some of the groups to turn their guns essentially towards the people who had brought Haiti to where it was at that point. And then this led to the Vivre Ensemble coalition. Arguably, he did start to lose a lot of support, though, because he essentially, Vivre Ensemble was a mix of peace accords and new coalitions. Some of the armed groups seemed to genuinely want to change from being criminal to being some sort of armed vigilance brigade or community protection group. And others seem to have simply taken advantage of the fact that there's a peace accord to continue enriching themselves and participating in criminal activity and, in fact, growing their criminal empire. In the case of like the Izo and the Five Segon gang, which you wouldn't know this from mainstream media reports, but the the armed group that is the biggest, most well-armed is Five Seconds, led by this guy who, like I said, had his own channel on YouTube. That's actually the biggest group, the biggest armed group in Port-au-Prince, not anything associated with Jimmy Cherizier before Vivre Ensemble. So Cherizier made this compromise to try to end inter-armed group violence by forming Vivre Ensemble, and my read is that he has lost a considerable amount of support because of this attempt to form a coalition.
Would he be allowed to run in an election, do you think?
According to the rules of the Transitional Presidential Council, no one who is engaged in criminal activity is allowed to either run for office or be a part of the council or what it may be. Now, of course, this has this irony in it because it's full of gangsters and criminal politicians. They themselves just can't be linked to the crimes that they're associated with.
Except for the guy with the YouTube channel.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it was eventually closed,
He's
but
done.
It kind of supports the argument I'm making that Cherizier was on the other side, because Cherizier had a very active Twitter account for a while, and it was shut down very quickly at the request of the Haitian government under Henri at the time, and the American government helped make that happen.
I bet they did.
Izo was allowed to continue running his very successful YouTube channel for years after that, with no resistance. So it kind of goes to show that there is a difference between the two. Keeping in mind that what I'm saying right now is I don't want to say a controversial take, but it's its own take, and there are many people who wouldn't agree with it. I would say the facts kind of back up this perspective. So if we come up to today now, this Vivre Ensemble coalition still exists, but exists in the way I'm describing, I think, where some of these armed groups are taking advantage of the peace to grow their criminal enterprise, while others seem to be truly engaged with fighting the PNH, the Haitian National Police. But Cherizier has reached out several times now, asking for negotiations, for dialogue with the transitional presidential government. He said that this guy, Gary Coney, who himself is tied to the Clinton Foundation, he hasn't been living in Haiti for a very long time. I couldn't tell exactly how, but I get the impression he hasn't been living in Haiti for at least a decade. He's kind of been imported as the prime minister elected by the Transitional Presidential Council. 7 people, again, very similar to the Council of Sages, Council of the Wise around 2004. And Cherizier has reached out to Gary Carney, asking for dialogue, asking for negotiations, saying he seems reasonable. He seems like somebody who wants what's best for Haitians, and he's willing to negotiate. However you want to describe a revolutionary movement, I don't engage in that conversation. I don't know how. He would call it a revolutionary movement, but simultaneously is very actively trying to engage in dialogue with Gary Carney, the new interim prime minister of Haiti.
Sounds naive.
And I don't think his goal is to actually get a seat on this transitional presidential council. It was at one point. But basically to have some kind of voice for regular Haitians, especially those living in the slums of Port-au-Prince, to have their voices heard and have their needs addressed as we move towards a new election. And that is a legitimate claim, because if you look at who's on this transitional presidential council, the only one member you could argue has any connections to the people is Leslie Voltaire, who is a representative for the Famille Lavalasse political party. And I think it's arguable that while that party's leader was Jean-Bertrand Aristide, that it truly was a party of the poor majority, that is arguably no longer the case, or that their support is much more localized. If you speak to a Haitian about this, if you speak to even someone who's has been involved in Haiti Solidarity, there's a lot of confusion between the Lavalasse movement, which is sort of just describing the democracy movement, the movement for Haitian sovereignty generally, with the Famille Lavalasse political party, which itself is now run by 4, upper class bourgeoisie.
Isn't that always the case? I mean, like when you're talking about there being no elected representative with ties to the people and a leftist party, that's not really leftist in practice. I mean, I think we all can
That sounds familiar, yeah.
relate to that political conundrum.
If you were speaking to somebody who was more let's say in tune with what was happening when Haiti in and around the coup in 2004, then they may, like I do sometimes, unconsciously switch back and forth between Lavalasse and Famille Lavalasse, but they should be distinguished. So Lavalasse movement and the Famille Lavalasse political party. And it's it does seem to be the case, although it sounds controversial, that some of these so-called armed group leaders or gang leaders are more in touch with the needs of their local population than any of these politicians, even those in Famille Lavalas. I can give you an example. While Jimmy Sherzy is much more of a hot topic, much more controversial, there are other more local leaders who were themselves part of the G9, like Ezekiel Alexandre. He at one point was actually arrested and thrown in jail, no charges, wasn't prosecuted, just sat and rotted in jail. Like 80-90% of the people who were in jail, they'd never been properly processed. When Vivre Ensemble went and emptied the prisons, which itself was a controversial move because it did mean it meant some violent criminals were released into the population, but the vast majority of the people who were released had never been charged with anything and were arguably there for political reasons. So
we're abolitionists here, so not so controversial.
Yeah, I mean, all I have to say is, like, you could point to say, oh, that person got out of jail and that's a bad person. That person's like credibly been accused of these crimes. Yes.
You could also point to their people of power and be like, these people are killing people by the thousands.
Yeah, exactly. Who hired them to do so? Create the social conditions for this to happen. But it's not arguable the majority of the people who were released from prison, or it can't be argued against, were themselves there without any charges and hadn't become part of the legal process. So he was one of these people who was released, and there was this interesting kind of episode that I managed to catch because I guess I was just sitting on the couch. Daily Telegram, is that the name of the UK outlet? Put out one of those short 1-minute videos of Ezekiel Alexandre returning to his neighborhood where he had once been the leader, and hundreds of people were pouring through the streets to come and meet him. None of them armed, none of them masked. Just locals, a mix of children, women, men, who were just happy to see him come back. And the love for this man was obvious, just in the way people were reacting. There were also interviews with a couple of locals, and they were just gushing over how happy they were for him to come back. And since he had been arrested, they had been under attack from criminal armed groups and so on. They quickly interviewed Ezekiel, who himself was being very humble and saying like he was happy to be back, but he was sad that his people had been under attack from this criminal armed group and so on, and he planned to kind of help take back the neighborhood. And I thought this was like a super interesting take. You don't see the mainstream media really let any of these local leaders have a fair interview and just let them be fairly portrayed and show how popular they are with their local populations. That's very rare. And within 24 hours, it was re-edited and released. And he was then not framed as a local leader, he was a gang leader. The interviews with the locals were removed. You still got to see the excited response of the locals when he was returning, but even some of the way they cut it made it a little hard to see how big the group was. Made it look like only a couple hundred versus well into the 400, 500, 600 people who were there to welcome him. So I just wanted to point out to your listeners, because there's a constant need to frame all these local leaders as vicious, brutal, gangsters. When in fact, while some of them are the exact opposite. Some of them are people who just, had these leadership qualities, rose up in their local neighborhoods and helped defend the people around them, and eventually started making alliances. And sometimes the leaders themselves were good at it because they were natural-born leaders. Other times because they had some kind of tactical experience, because they worked for the police at one point and were better able to use whatever arms they had to defend their neighborhoods against criminal groups.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why I asked about the term gangster, just because throughout history, the way local leaders or resistance leaders of any form have been portrayed is you don't know what you're getting, right? You actually would have to experience or hear it firsthand from reliable sources to get the truth. It's so easy to portray an armed group as criminal or terror, and even involvement in the drug trade in a nation as poor as Haiti, to me, doesn't then make you this evil element. It's how your people are living, right? The material experience of your people and their amount of freedom that they experience and whatnot. But what crop that they're using or distributing, to me, it's often by necessity, right? When you cut people off, criminal trades are often the only thing left to folks. But yeah, from a Canadian perspective and with the limited amount of information that we have,
Yeah,
It's so easy to just imagine just this war-torn country with gangs with no really rhyme or reason to it. So I do appreciate you kind of taking us through that.
yeah. Dr. Jemima Pierre, who is associated with the Black Agenda Report and the Black Alliance for Peace, often speaks on Haiti, and yeah, she would make that point that the term "gang" is a racialized term. It's like is meant to like create a certain image in the person's head. This also, like the points you're making, reflects a lot of the debates I end up having kind of one on one with people I would describe as ex Haiti solidarity activists or people formerly paying attention to Haiti but no longer. I recommend to your listeners they watch the documentary Another Vision. This is sort of the roots of a lot of the I don't want to use the word controversy, but the debates over Jimmy Cherizier's role and the role of these armed groups in Haiti. The debates I would get into over these people is sort of saying like, listen, you may not feel like Cherizier is sort of the next Aristide, the next leader of Haiti, fine. But when you look at the actual video footage, you can see the territory he controls. People seem happy. People are taken care of. It's clean. This contrasts heavily with the parts of Port-au-Prince that he doesn't have control over, that are in his territory, where people are walking around and living in sewage 24 hours a day. There's not an exaggeration. Like, they literally live in trash. These poor people living in the slums. And when they'll go and interview people living in a territory, people will speak positively of Cherizier and G9 and so on, because they offer, they cover their basic needs. They protect them from these armed groups. They're able to run their businesses, their small businesses. They're fed, they're taken care of. And he takes in refugees from other parts of Port-au-Prince in areas where there's a lot of violence and people need safe haven. The response in these discussions I have is like, well, they're crisis actors, or they have no choice. They have to say this, or they're going to be threatened. And I'll have to leave it up to your listeners to watch documentary and see whether these people are being authentic or not. But my interpretation is that they are indeed being authentic, and they would prefer to live in peace and harmony and with security and with a functioning government, but given the options, choose to move to territory that's controlled by Cherizier because they know they'll be protected and so on. Yeah,
it's nothing short of complicated, but I imagine if you look at any kind of nation's
it is
current
complicated.
political, if you take in all the factors that we don't see, it all is very complicated, but then very simple in the end, because when you boil it all down, I think we go back to the purported motives, the geopolitical motives, and setting an example of Haiti for the Caribbean and beyond, and
yeah, and it's important to note, because that was one of the first things you brought up. I don't think I got distracted. Haiti does have mineral and oil resources. They're there and they're significant, but Haiti's geostrategic role is the essential issue when it comes to the United States. They do want access to a poor working force now that all the antagonism with China have kind of getting ramped up, and they may need to compete rather than just like take advantage of China as kind of like a gigantic textile assembly plant, and they may need the Haitian population, but it doesn't explain everything. What really the central issue is the fact that itself is always a risk for a revolution, and a revolution likely leading in a socialist direction, and having another quote unquote bad example, not far away from Cuba, being supported by Venezuela and Nicaragua is a huge problem as far as they're concerned. So that's the main reason they want to maintain Haiti shift Haiti from a neo-colony to a colonial status, maintain as a colony of the United States, take advantage of the local population for cheap assembly, but also prevent any chance of there being any kind of revolution leading to a representative democracy there. That's central.
But of course they can't say this, right? And when the Canadian government is handing over funds, that absolutely can't be their talking point. So what we'll hear is they're trying to install peace and improve the living conditions of particularly folks in the capital there of Haiti and Port-au-Prince.
Yeah, like I run a news gathering website, so for getting news or finding interesting information on kind of Canada's role in Haiti, you can go there. As far as like active solidarity groups, I would look to the Black Alliance for Peace. and the United States and their Haiti Americas team. They're doing good work and are kind of on top of what's happening in Haiti. In Canada, we do have some solidarity groups in one form or another, but they're not cohesive in the sense that they don't agree on a lot of the fundamental issues. So there is one group called Debout for Dignité, based here in Montreal, which is a faith-based solidarity group coming out of one particular church led by the pastor. They have had a few demonstrations, and they are actively trying to get Canada to be more involved in Haiti. So they would have liked them to lead the multinational security support mission. There's also Solidarité Québec Haïti, which they're a smaller group based in Montreal, led largely by Jenny Law-Sully and by who's based here in Montreal, and Jean Saint-Ville, who's a longtime Haiti activist based in Gatineau. I would say they're small just in the sense that when they do have demonstrations, they are quite small. And the other organization, if someone is interested again involved in Haiti, is the Busta John Foundation, or Busta John, who is himself also part of the diaspora. The only issue there is like the show is entirely in Creole, so it's not something your average person can follow. But if someone is trying to figure out, where the numbers are, when they have a demonstration, they're considerably larger than any other group, and they have direct ties to Haiti. And he, along with his co-host, hosts a daily show that's directed to the Haitian community because it's entirely in Creole. So that movement or that organization would probably be the most significant right now. And it's worth noting that I'm only talking about groups that are based in and around Montreal, Quebec. That is where the diaspora largely is here.
I mean, it's a hard quest for them in the political climate that we kind of described at the beginning of the show, where much of the focus on our foreign policy right now is obviously on Palestine and Ukraine. And we never like to really dive too deep in our involvement in coups. That's usually limited to even a section of the left, right? That even pay attention to foreign policy and then go deep enough to see I want to say truth, but then you end up sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but, who fully appreciate Canada's imperialist role, like that we're not like this second player all the time, that we do play heavy hand in some terrible situations.
It's understandable why the relatively small sector of the Canadian population that is kind of on the left, anti-imperialist, and like really trying to do investigative work or pay close attention to this are now focused on Palestine. There's a genocide happening there, so it's that's totally understandable. And previous to that, it was Ukraine and Russia, and that was causing divisions even amongst so-called anti-imperialists. Like you said, anyone who is going to speak about Haiti, not necessarily to the mainstream media, but even just on like a friendly podcast on the left, there's so much to explain and break down that you can end up with a history lesson, which can be exhausting. And there's very, very rarely, almost never, an opportunity for debate amongst the handful of people who are paying attention on the left to kind of trying to sort out some of these issues. So that's why you're finding, in my opinion, this kind of wide spectrum of like the anti-imperialists have created this chaos and this death and this this pain and suffering, largely in Port-au-Prince. People want to see it come to an end and don't see any like easy solutions. So you end up with anti-imperialists, some quite notable, who end up siding with the imperialists and saying, yeah, okay, fine, transitional presidential council selected by the imperialists, this like Kenyan force who themselves are likely, who have their own issues at home, have been accused of being like, criminal death squads and so on, importing them into Haiti. How is that possibly going to help? And just kind of throw up their hands and go, I don't know what's better. So I think we need more of the left's attention right now because, like I said, if you count up the number of journalists on the left doing investigative journalism on Haiti in English, you can count it on one hand.
Well, it makes me appreciate you even more, and I'm sure our audience will be consuming this with, maybe not taking as many notes as I did, but learning a lot. Like a lot of that was new information to me. I mean, the purpose and the drive behind it and the pattern is not perhaps new, but I think I was still surprised at just how dirty the West has done Haiti seemingly in our backyard with no one noticing. Thankful it's not nobody, but you know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't gain the traction that it does. And considering the potential use of the Global Fragility Act, I know that this is not the last time that I'm going to talk about it, so I may have to call you back on to unpack the possible consequences of that. And if it's used, obviously it's something to watch as they would likely roll this out, because I can see right now that Canadians, Americans would all absolutely agree to an armed force to stop the genocide in Gaza. And they would agree to a 10-year occupation that may never end, right? And they would do that out of desperation without questioning, because of the conditions that they're seeing, in the same way that you're seeing the relentless Port-au-Prince situation breaking down folks who understand that just any answer isn't good enough, right? Like, it likely would dig the hole even deeper for some folks. So thank you so much, Travis.
It's been a pleasure. I have another piece coming out for the Canada Files, excellent website, in the next couple of weeks, kind of focused on a recent statement by NGOs in Canada, essentially supporting Canadian foreign policy which is American foreign policy in Haiti. So you can check that out. That'll be out soon. And if they're interested in learning more about some of these like so-called human rights groups and NGOs in Haiti that are backed by the Canadian American governments, then I wrote 2 pieces in April for the Canada Files as well. The first part kind of goes in history, and the second part goes into current funding and where that funding is going.
We'll have to get Aiden on as well. I keep meaning to do that from the Canada Files, but I will dig up some of those articles, and in the show notes, you will find all of these references, so you can do more digging yourself and see some of Travis's work firsthand.
That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. Blueprints of Disruption is an independent production operated cooperatively. You can follow us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.